Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of What's Going On in Banking. I'm Ron Shevlin, Chief Research Officer at Cornerstone Advisors, and here, of course, with my colleague, Stacey Bryant. Guys, we've got to get right into the discussion today. And at the top of our list to talk about is Chase's decision, or announcement, I should say, that they are planning to charge Fintechs or somebody for customer data access. This has touched off a firestorm. Not surprising that the reaction from the fintech world has not been very positive towards this. But what really kind of digs at me is some of the outlandish claims that have been made that this is a data rights issue, that it's going to hold back innovation, or it's going to harm families that the financial system is meant to serve. Some of this has been just really outrageous. I saw one fintech influencer who commented, "So now JPMorgan Chase is going to charge me to access my own data." No, JPMorgan Chase is not charging you to access your own data. The charge is that this is going to supplant and tamp down innovation. Really? But how's that going to be? In fact, have we seen any decrease in innovation in the last 100 years? With lots of different regulatory controls and prices and charges, fees that people get charged for? No. And this is simply not going to be a charge to consumers, and so it is not going to harm families. There's been a lot of comments from the fintech community in particular, or consumer rights organizations, or whoever's against the Chase decision on this, that this is something unfair, illegal, and maybe it is. I have to admit that I'm no lawyer. I didn't even try to read the Dodd-Frank Act or the 1033 rule. I relied on a couple of different LLMs to do that for me and still didn't get a good answer. So I reached out to a couple of lawyers that I do know, and both of them told me that it was inconclusive whether or not this was truly being prevented by the laws, or whether it was the 1033 rule that was preventing it, which the CFPB, at least in its current incarnation, has said that they are either throwing out or not enforcing. So lots of questions behind this, but at the fundamental fundamental base of this is the question of whether or not JPMorgan Chase is right or has a right to charge for this. First of all, I think it's a brilliant strategic move on their part to put a stake in the ground to do this and force a decision, and to change the economics of the business. Now, if you're a fintech on the other side, you don't like it, and there's a question of whether or not these costs will all be passed through to the customer, of course, from somebody, whether it's the fintechs or the data aggregators, however that might play out. But this is something that we see in all. And is it really fair to limit one organization's or companies or industries' right to charge for what they do, and not allow it to be passed on to somebody else? Let me give you kind of an analogy here that we'll see how well this plays out. Stacey, can you see the envelope that I'm holding up here?
Yep.
Stacey, this is my envelope. My envelope. I paid for it. I have a receipt to prove that it is my envelope. No question about who owns that envelope. I own that envelope. See what I'm holding up now? $20 bill. I am putting this $20 bill into this envelope, and I would like to send it to you. I would like you to have this $20 that is sitting in this envelope. Question is, since we are not in the same room together, how do I get this envelope with the $20 to you? Well, I could get in my car, drive from Boston down to New Jersey, or wherever the hell you live. But that would be very inconvenient, wouldn't it? But it would be safe. Well, at least I would know that the envelope and the money got to you if I did that, but it would be pretty inconvenient. And if I had to do this on a regular basis, that would be really inconvenient.
We'll pay a lot of money in tolls, Ron.
That's true, too. But which actually raises another point is, Why are they charging for access to the road? That's crazy. But anyway, let me just play out my analogy here. So driving this down to you in New Jersey would be very inconvenient. Boy, I wish there was another way to do it. Oh, there is. Yes. I could take this down to the post office, the United States Postal Service, and they would bring this envelope and the money down to you. The question of whether or not it would be safe is a big if these days with what's been happening there. But guess what? They would charge me to do this.
Of course.
What? It's my envelope. It's my money. Why are they charging? Well, it would take a few days to get there. Maybe I could send it through Federal Express. But boy, they'd want to charge me $12 to $15 to do this, to take it down to you. Wait, what, can you believe this? It's my envelope. Why are they charging me to do this? Now, I know I'm going to take a lot of grief for this analogy, and someone's going to poke all the holes in it. But the reality really holds up that JPMorgan Chase and other banks have built the infrastructure and the technology to move data from one place to another and do it securely, safely, and rapidly and reliably. And the fact that they want to charge for it, number one, they should be able to charge for it. Number two, they should actually be able to charge whatever they want for it. Just like the Postal Service gets regulated, but Federal Express, UPS, they all dictate their own prices, and they let the market force the supply and demand. If something gets too far out of line from a price perspective, we have choices. And the reality of the banking world is today, Stacey, we've got thousands of banks in the U.S., thousands of credit unions. And if JPMorgan Chase were to actually charge their customers to do this, whether or not it was legal or not for them to do it, customers have a choice, either pay it or walk and go somewhere else to another bank or credit union that wouldn't charge them for this. Reality is that this is not the way it's working. These are customers now of other providers of banking services, and they want their data moved to them. Why should JPMorgan Chase be forced to do this? Okay, Chasey, what's wrong with my argument? Where's the logic going wrong? Forget the legality of this for a moment, because if I've got called out yesterday on LinkedIn for being wrong in my interpretation that JPMorgan Chase had a right to do this. That made me realize, well, okay, I'm no lawyer. I shouldn't be looking at whether or not they have a right to do it. But the idea that this is going to dampen innovation, harm families, or is a data rights issue, I can't go with. Where am I going wrong?
I think that you mentioned it in the article as well, and I think you even referenced Jeff Bezos, who founded Amazon, right? Like your margin is my opportunity. I think that Jamie Dimon over at JPMorgan Chase, this is let's say, for a lack of a better term, a new expense line item, especially for a lot of startups and all those that are extremely dabbling into API integrations to go ahead and transfer data from one shop to another. And you're messing with their pockets. You think about, as I'm on the roads, Ron, I also, apart from, the banking folks that I speak to, I like to speak to a lot of these vendors, especially in the fintech area, and understand what their business model is. I always ask that question. Some get irritated because I'm asking how they're getting away with it all after they've solved or they're solving a niche, so to speak. And I'd say, off of my own research and development on these roads, the margin is pretty high. I want to maybe say there's like a 60 to 70% profit margin. And I think that it was only a matter of time, whether it was Jamie Dimon or someone else that was going to, I think this charge, Ron, is inevitable, right? Just like if I had to, if my grandmother back in the day used to send me birthday cards with $10 and $20, she had to eat the cost of the stamp, right? So it's part of the ecosystem of where we're transforming to. And it's just another way of, and I love the analogy of the whole stamp and charges. I know I had to send my brothers out in Spain. I had to send him a couple of goods from here. I went to your point at UPS. They were charging me an astronomical amount, went over, shopped around, went to the post office and sent it. It took a few more days, but for significantly less. So, when I think about, even the peer-to-peer payments, let's use, Venmo, for instance. I know Venmo, you can receive the funds instantaneously and they charge that their own version of the interchange, or you can wait a couple of business days and you can, have your funds fee free. So all in all, my thoughts are this is inevitably going to happen. That's it. Plain and simple. And I think that once you start touching the margin for a lot of these folks, right, now that they're really leaning into AI to improve efficiencies across the board, you're going to ruffle feathers, and it's part of the process.
How do you think it's going to play out?
Oh, I think that they have no choice. I think, how do we, if I'm a startup and I'm leveraging AI, to reduce the barrier for a community shop, so to speak, how instantaneously do I want to leverage this data? That is a value proposition when folks are pitching to the banking world. So I think that you're going to have to eat it or find another way to eat the kiwi, to see how else you can increase that margin and absorb it. I don't see it playing out any different. That's my forecast. So, well,
I'll put a stake in the sand here and say I think there's one of two outcomes here. And one is basically we get regulatory clarity. And I do think that regulatory clarity, if we get it, will enable and allow for a charge on the part of the banks that will be cost controlled, not unlike what they've done with interchange, which I don't agree with their cost calculations. That's a totally different issue. But that's what's really inconsistent about the Rule 1033 that came out last fall with what happened with the interchange is that, okay, they allowed for the interchange charge, but said, okay, it's got to be capped by a certain amount that was based on what they calculated to be the cost to deliver it. So first of all, if we're going to have some regulatory intrusion here, at least it could be consistent with an estimate of what the costs would be. Problem with that regulatory approach is that it would take minimum 12 to 18 months, maybe faster, to come to some sort of calculation on what that would be, and leaving a lot of time for confusion in the marketplace. The second path of the outcome would be no regulatory clarity. And I don't think we'll see anything that would change anything what Chase is trying to do until and unless a new administration comes along, or perhaps a change in the House and Senate status in the midterms of next year. But that would still give Chase, a period of time in which they could start implementing and instituting charges and fees for this. I can't help but wonder if this sets up a future opportunity for smaller banks and credit unions to kind of establish more partnerships with the Fintechs who are not stealing customers, because in many cases they're not providing the same set of products and services.
Right.
But I think it would maybe allow a mid-sized institution to negotiate with a fintech and say, okay, look, we'll provide this data for you directly at no charge, but we want something in return, like aggregated anonymized data about how consumers are doing or something. And I think ultimately that's kind of what Chase is going to ultimately end up doing, is negotiating the fees down for some sort of value back, whether it's in the form of data or something. There are no dummies there. They know what they're doing. And I think they're taking the Trump approach to negotiation, which is go outlandish at first and then negotiate back in.
Well, and you make a good point. Can we just, you mentioned the 1033 rule, right? You even mentioned it in the article as far as, back last year. And there were like three ways in which banks can charge fees, right? So when we think about JPMorgan, you mentioned it yourself. So being reasonable. You also mentioned not used to undermine access. And then over here, you also added not discriminatory or anti-competitive. And I'd say that a lot of the comments, since this article and a lot of the comments of this news, I think they're leaning towards number three. I think a lot of these fintech folks whose feathers have been ruffled, as I said a minute ago, I think they're leaning into that third bucket, just because they're griping and screaming. I think about like that toddler who's kicking and screaming, that GIF, that emoji, and that's how I look at them in my head. So they're going to ruffle feathers. They'll be fine if they want to do business and they want to leverage your potential customer or members' data. Then they're going to have to eat this. And I think that we won't see this when we think about the administration. I forecast similar to you, but I would take it beyond to not seeing anything happen in this during this administration. So another maybe 3 years and a half until maybe even more for us to see actual change here. Yeah.
Well, keep in mind too that it may not be the direct impact on the fintechs, but on the aggregators and whether or not they pass those costs on to the fintechs, because they're often and usually the ones that are the intermediary between the bank and the fintech to get the data. So a lot of confusion, a lot of ifs, but we'll see what plays out here.
Yeah.
There's something else I know we wanted to talk about today around the utilization of large language models. And tell us a little bit about the American Banker article you saw about Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Ron. So when we think about these startups, right, and when we think about even on enterprise level, you and I are on the road, right? You speak to a lot of boards as well, where they want some sort of education. I know you don't really like that term, but you're there to provoke. But I think that, when we think about leveraging AI to become much more innovative and very quickly, in previous episodes, Ron, we've mentioned how to integrate AI and from a test and learn approach. And I think that this is like the epitome of test and learn. So so saw this article a few days ago from American Banker. Headlines: Goldman Sachs staff now write 1 million Gen AI prompts a month, which obviously great headline there. And essentially it's where they rolled out initially back last year, 2024, they provided their 12,000 or so developers with GitHub Copilot coding assistance. Now they're giving their developers Cognition's Dev and Agentic AI to act as a team member. So for those listeners, just to kind of break down the types of AI, agentic AI acts as autonomous agents capable of making independent decisions with set goals and have the agency to execute tasks with little to no human intervention, right? AKA, what do you think about? Machine learning. So this relies on machine learning, and you mentioned yourself, and a place on where it can extract large language models for that specific organization. So the move reflects a broader strategy to integrate Gen AI firm-wide. Again, how do we integrate, Stacey? Where do we even begin? This is a nice, again, test and learn. The bank's CIO, Marco Argenetti, takes on how, when, and where they deployed the advanced AI. And a quote he mentioned, purely simple: there's no quality AI without good quality data. Does that ring a bell? Right? When we mentioned data strategy, data governance, data warehousing, all these, what can we do today? What is tangible today in order for us to go ahead and maybe evolve to how we can go ahead and implement AI? They had to be comfortable and confident on leveraging their clean data. They also identified use cases that truly add value. And after meeting strict requirements for data protection, minimizing hallucinations, and ensuring cybersecurity, the rollout was greenlit across the firm. And here's what they did. So the phases were initially providing AI assistance to all levels of the team members. So they distributed, so to speak, or provided the access to their analysts, their executive leadership team, vice presidents, you name it, down to their marketing team. And today they've recorded having over 1 million prompts written by their employees, and new prompts are growing drastically. They pride themselves, the article goes on, they pride themselves on working backwards, using it internally first. How about that? Improving productivity per department, such as client presentations, financial analysis, internal communication. employees at all levels are sharing their experiences and best practices, accelerating the overall adoption. So I think that's what I love mostly about, this highlight for Goldman Sachs is that some way, somehow, they're figuring out, all right, whether it be every week or real time. Stacey, how are you using, what are the prompts that you're using? How is it helping you with productivity? And they're getting that over. They have an entire team that's ciphering out all that feedback from the folks that are leveraging, those agentic models today. Their ranking goes on. They're ranking with specific models, providing the most accurate answer at the lowest possible cost. And their greatest model, they're testing and learning, as I said, using the latest Gemini, the latest Claude, latest GPT. And the CIO even admitted, Ron, to leveraging a virtual colleague in which he's delegating work to. I think we can maybe attest to that ourselves. He's writing on becoming much more efficient and doing more with the same workforce. And here's my favorite part of the article. He goes on to say, I'm going to just skip over a few things here. They ask, the last question was, how are they measuring ROI, the return, the AI ROI return? And check this out. He says they're measuring development productivity on how much more productive. So that's the measurement, which translates into cost savings. He goes on to say, then we're assuming that agents will increase these cost savings, but by how much, we don't know yet. So mouthful as always, but great test and learn for me as far as how are we adopting it internally? How are all these tiers from the frontline level, right, the grassroots level in front of the actual customer, having these conversations all the way from the tippy top? They're really kind of reporting back on what's working and what's not working. So again, I think you have some travels next week. You're going to be chatting with some boards here on exactly everything technology innovation. So when we think about this test and learn phase for Goldman Sachs, how does that apply from what you're seeing on the road?
Well, let me address the article first and
of course,
and what was in there. And I forgot who the author was and who wrote it for American Banker, but he or she did a great job of trying to get something of value out of the CIO at Goldman Sachs. And I got to give him credit for spewing 1,000 words that really didn't say anything, if you ask me. Maybe that's a little harsh.
I think it's harsh, Rod. He asked them the who, what, where, when, why, very in a nice way.
Well, 1 million prompts. It's kind of like 17 billion hamburgers sold, but were they any good, those hamburgers? No. In other words, what were these prompts about? Right. Is there a categorization? I mean, it's interesting that some people are using it to develop client presentations and stuff like that.
Right.
But here's the thing. And what about the other 995,000 prompts? What were they all about? Are these prompts from people who don't know how to do their job and then are asking ChatGPT or Claude to do something? Is it displacing where they're going to maybe Googling something, but putting it into ChatGPT or a large language model instead? And how many of these things were really productive? I couldn't even begin to count the number of prompts that I give ChatGPT in a week. But sometimes it's because I ask it for something, I don't get what I want, and I have to rephrase it 3 or 4 times. Okay, so there's 5 prompts right there to get one thing done. Maybe it's saving me time to do it in the overall, but it is certainly not really impacting any cost reduction on the part of Cornerstone. And this is why the ROI question, I think, is just absolutely ridiculous and has been for more than 40 years. 45 years ago, when PCs started appearing on everybody's desks, the economists were saying, we don't see any impact on productivity. It's like, right, because you're looking at employment numbers. And this wasn't replacing anybody. It was creating capacity for people to do things. And that's basically what's happening now is we've got a whole new set of tools that increases our capacity. There is no ROI on these things unless you're actually letting people go. And that's not what's happening for the most part at Goldman Sachs or pretty much everywhere else in banking. So he skirted the question of what was better, Claude, ChatGPT, or what was the other one they looked at? I forgot. Gemini. Completely skipped on that answer. He went to something about oh, it has a difference in related to the differences in reasoning capability. What are you talking about? That I don't know where you came up with that answer. So this is ultimately, I think, not a helpful article for a lot of mid-sized financial institutions who are trying to figure out what to do. If this simply means, well, let's just turn on this spigot and integrate Gemini, Claude, Perplexity, and ChatGPT and let people run with it, that's not going to be super helpful. They need a lot more focus in terms of on a use case by use case basis, or defining the use cases, probably the bigger challenge for a lot of institutions. And figuring out where are we going to have some bang for the buck, where is there time savings available, but what's more critical? Really, client presentations, are they really doing a much better job at those client presentations, that they're now getting more money into it? If so, then there's an opportunity to do something. But there's also, I think, in fact, we just did some research at Cornerstone, published it about a month or two ago, looking at the impact of large language models from the perspective of policy and procedures enhancement or enforcement, I should say, in the organization. And while none of the banks we talked to could really quantify it, they all believed, and these were senior executives we interviewed, who all believed that there was significant time savings, not just in terms of the effort, but in terms of the speed of the process itself. Whereas in the old world, you would submit a question to somebody somewhere in the organization, and 3 days later, you might hear back from them. But now with the large language model that encompasses all the policies, procedures, they're getting answers to their questions within seconds, not days.
Yeah.
So, there's a use case from a policy procedure perspective that's really on the mark. But focusing on the ROI piece, I think, is a wrong area. And this generic thought of, well, how many prompts you write or submitted is some badge of honor, I think it's kind of ridiculous.
So, and I think I feel like for me, Ron, the moral of it, yes, did the article give us anything in particular that was, mind blowing? Perhaps not, right? I mean, we researched this, and that's, I know I live, eat, and breathe it now more than ever. But I think for me, the actual article, the moral of the story here is, here's Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest, and I say this respectfully, one of the biggest dogs, so to speak, of financial services, who are literally just testing with prompts. Yes, headline. I mean, it was funny because in the article, they go on to comparing Gen AI models with humans and how they benchmark them, and how Gen AI, these models, or the agentic models should be held accountable with the same level of scrutiny and controls that are placed with humans. I'm not even sure. That's a whole nother conversation, because how can you reprimand an AI model that's hallucinating, and now your reputation as an organization is on the line? But I digress. I think that the moral is, here's some folks who are literally testing it out. And when you start testing it out, a seed is planted and the seeds keep sprouting. You mentioned earlier about like even the transformation, right? I think about when animation started, right? From like literally pen and paper, and now, to 3D animation movies, in which now a true creative can really highlight and showcase what's available. And I think that had it not been for that pen and paper, we would have never morphed into 3D and all the other capabilities of film and animation there. So again, and I think what struck me so much here, going back to Stacey on the road, Ron, is I just came back from the African American Credit Union Coalition in Atlanta, just a whole bunch of credit unions from all asset sizes, from all spanning from the entire nation. And there was a breakout session for AI and tech and how to integrate it, standing room only also. And they were really saying a lot of, the facilitator was giving a lot of basics, right? Similar to this article, basics. And I think when we think about baby boomers, when we think about all the generations in banking, I think it's important for us to maybe start small, so to speak, and make it sound a bit easy and applicable to whatever enterprise level from a PowerPoint presentation, so that we can then be able to be a bit more agile come down the road. So I think that was the biggest aha for me, is just another way to look at how easy it could be to go ahead and integrate AI today.
Great point, Stacey, and I will give you the last word on this one. And I think we'll wrap up this episode of What's Going On in Banking. Thanks for a great conversation.
Of course, Rod.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Thanks. Bye now.
Appreciate you. If you enjoyed today's What's Going On in Banking episode, make sure to hit that follow button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. We've got more great conversations, nitty, witty, gritty, coming your way, and you won't want to miss them. Thanks for tuning in.